I'm delighted to address the IDEA conference, From Climate Change to Climate Justice, a development education response. As you can well understand, this is very much where I am now with my colleagues in the Mary Robinson Foundation, Climate Justice. I came to the climate change issue from a human rights perspective. I had been working in an earlier organization called Realizing Rights, focusing on African countries. And we found more and more that what subsistence farmers and poor people in slums were telling us was that everything was worse now. There were no predictable seasons, long periods of drought, then flash flooding, or in countries like Liberia, the rainy seasons didn't come when they should. So farmers didn't know when to sow. In slum areas, people were being flooded, and some people killed in Monrovia while I was there because of increased flooding of the heavy and longer rainy periods. We came very much to a human-centered approach to climate, linking human rights, development, and climate change. And we put a lot of emphasis on the more vulnerable, on those whose voice needs to be heard. And of course, development education can explain the impacts of climate change on poor peoples and poor countries, and can bring out the factors that we have to address on mitigation and adaptation, transfer of technology, financing, etc. It's important, we believe, to create a new narrative on climate change, which is more people-centered and brings out the stories, and development education can help to do that. It's vital that we engage in and encourage more research on climate change and climate justice. Our foundation has developed a climate justice research database, which has identified some 80 research projects in Irish universities that have a climate justice approach. And I'm glad to say that the Glasgow Caledonian University, which I spoke in recently, has undertaken to build an international database. So that will help to respond to and inform the approach to climate change and explain what we mean by climate justice. To move to a climate justice narrative, we must make strong links between climate change and the impact it has on people. And one of the areas where that can be brought out very clearly is on food and nutrition security. As you will know, we are very concerned, particularly about the impact of climate on small farmers, subsistence farmers, clearly in Africa, but also in South Asia. I was in Bangladesh recently and I saw the impact of flooding there and the fact that they may face huge displacement of people in the whole area where cyclones hit and where there is persistent flooding. The role of development education should be to actually avoid pigeonholing, not put the whole issue into just geography. It has to be multidisciplinary. It has to look at the science, look at social systems, look at law, look at the environmental issues in a very holistic way. One of the principles that we've identified in the Mary Robinson Foundation, if you go into our website, you'll see our principles of climate justice. And one of these is to harness the transformative power of education for climate stewardship. We believe that education can play a vital role, and we're not just talking about school or university education, we're talking about lifelong education, we're talking about development education in its fullest sense. In fact, I hope that older generations like myself, the grandparents, will teach us all to think more intergenerationally. This is an intergenerational issue. We are using up the carbon of the populations of the future. We are going to make their lives much more difficult. I still think that generations to come will look back and say, how could they have been so selfish? How could they have been so short-term in their thinking? And I want development education to be part of why we think longer term and why we think in terms of climate justice. So I'm delighted that you're gathered for this IDEA conference, which is moving us from climate change to climate justice. And I believe that that is what the world needs. All good wishes in your conference.